In the 1960s, church ladies made suppers that truly mattered. Their work in fellowship halls didn't just serve prayers, they created meals using simple pantry staples that cost pennies. These 30 forgotten church suppers may sound plain today, but they fed whole congregations when potlucks meant community and care. Let's rediscover 30 old dishes grandmas made for Sunday gatherings without leaving anyone hungry. Fellowship Hall spaghetti was the backbone of every 1950s church fundraiser. A simple yet hearty dish that fed dozens without breaking the budget. Made with ground beef, canned tomato sauce, onions, garlic, and cooked spaghetti noodles, this casserole baked in large pans and filled the church basement with the comforting aroma of Italian seasoning and melted cheese. The beef browned first, then simmered with the sauce until thick and rich, before being layered with the noodles and topped with mozzarella or cheddar. Baked at 350 F for 30 minutes, it emerged bubbly and golden, ready to be scooped onto paper plates alongside garlic bread and coleslaw. Church ladies loved this recipe because it stretched ingredients far, cost pennies per serving, and always disappeared before the dessert table opened. Leftovers, if any, were wrapped in foil and sent home with families who needed an extra meal. Fellowship Hall spaghetti proved that church suppers weren't just about food, they were about community, care, and making sure no one left hungry. Sunday school tuna bake was a staple at every church potluck, a creamy casserole that combined affordability with comfort in one 9 by 13 pan. Made with canned tuna, egg noodles, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, and a crunchy breadcrumb topping, this dish required minimal effort but delivered maximum satisfaction. The noodles boiled until tender, then mixed with flaked tuna, soup thinned with milk, and peas before being spread into a buttered baking dish. Breadcrumbs mixed with melted butter scattered over the top, creating a golden crust that crackled under the fork. Baked at 350 F for 25 minutes, it emerged steaming and fragrant, perfect for serving alongside dinner rolls and green salad. Seniors still remember the taste, mild, creamy, and filling, and the way everyone lined up for seconds before the pan emptied. Sunday school tuna bake symbolized resourcefulness and care, turning pantry staples into a meal that felt like home, even when served on folding tables in a crowded fellowship hall. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Potluck chicken rice was the go-to dish for church dinners because it traveled well, stayed warm, and pleased every palate. Made with chicken pieces, long-grain white rice, cream of chicken soup, onion soup mix, and water, this one-pan wonder required almost no prep yet tasted like hours of work. The rice spread across the bottom of a greased casserole dish, then topped with raw chicken pieces seasoned with salt and pepper. The soups mixed with water poured over everything, seeping into the rice and infusing it with savory flavor as it baked. Covered with foil and baked at 350 F for 90 minutes, the chicken turned tender and the rice absorbed every drop of liquid, creating a creamy, cohesive dish that scooped easily. Seniors craved this recipe because it reminded them of Sunday afternoons after service when the whole congregation gathered to share food, stories, and fellowship, and potluck chicken rice always anchored the buffet table. Creamy baked noodles brought simple elegance to church suppers, a dish that looked impressive but required only 5 ingredients and 1 baking dish. Made with cooked egg noodles, sour cream, cottage cheese, shredded cheddar, and a sprinkle of paprika, this casserole baked into a rich, tangy side that paired perfectly with fried chicken or roast beef. The noodles boiled until tender, then drained and mixed with sour cream and cottage cheese until every strand coated with creamy goodness. Spread into a buttered dish topped with cheddar and paprika, then baked at 350 F for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and the edges bubbled. The result was comfort in every bite: soft noodles, tangy dairy richness, and a golden top that seniors still remember scraping from the pan. Creamy baked noodles proved that church ladies knew how to make magic from humble ingredients, turning everyday staples into dishes people requested by name and never forgot. Picnic stuffed eggs were the appetizer everyone grabbed first at church picnics and potlucks. A simple yet satisfying starter that required only eggs, mayonnaise, mustard, salt, and paprika. Dozens of hard-boiled eggs halved lengthwise, their yolks scooped into a bowl and mashed with creamy mayo, tangy yellow mustard, and a pinch of salt until smooth and pipeable. Spooned back into the whites, each egg topped with a dusting of paprika for color and a hint of smoky flavor. Arranged on a platter, they disappeared within minutes as church members lined up for their share. Seniors still craved these eggs because they tasted like summer Sundays after service, when tables set up outside under the trees and everyone brought their best dish to share. Picnic stuffed eggs symbolized simplicity and tradition, a recipe passed down through generations that never changed because it never needed to, always perfect just as it was. These 5 church supper classics, from fellowship hall spaghetti to picnic stuffed eggs, remind us how 1950s congregations turned simple ingredients into meals that fed the soul as much as the body, proving that the best food always tastes better when shared with community. Coastal casserole brought a taste of the ocean to landlocked church basements, a seafood dish made with canned shrimp, crab, or a mix of both, combined with rice, cream of celery soup, onions, and topped with buttered crackers. The seafood drained and flaked, then mixed with cooked rice, soup thinned with milk, and diced onion for a creamy base that spread into a buttered dish. Crushed crackers mixed with melted butter scattered over the top, creating a crunchy contrast to the soft filling beneath. Baked at 350 F for 35 minutes, it emerged golden and bubbling, filling the hall with a briny, comforting aroma. Seniors remember this dish as a special occasion casserole, reserved for Easter dinners and summer fish fries when the church wanted to serve something a little fancier. Coastal casserole proved that even canned seafood could shine when prepared with care, turning budget ingredients into a dish people still talk about decades later. Stuffed cabbage rolls were the labor of love that always earned praise at church suppers, a hands-on dish made with cabbage leaves, ground beef, cooked rice, onion, and tomato sauce. The cabbage blanched until the leaves turned soft and pliable, then each leaf filled with a mixture of seasoned beef, rice, and minced onion before being rolled tight and placed seam-side down in a baking dish. Tomato sauce poured over the rolls, covering them completely, then the whole pan baked at 350 F for 90 minutes until the beef cooked through and the flavors melded. The result was tender, savory, and comforting, each roll slicing cleanly to reveal the filling inside. Seniors craved these rolls because they reminded them of the church ladies who spent Saturday afternoons rolling dozens by hand, their kitchen tables covered in cabbage and bowls of filling, preparing food with care for Sunday's gathering. Stuffed cabbage rolls symbolized dedication, tradition, and the kind of cooking that came from the heart. Crispy potato bake was the side dish everyone hoped someone would bring, a layered casserole made with frozen shredded potatoes, sour cream, cheddar cheese, onion, and a buttery cornflake topping. The potatoes thawed slightly, then mixed with sour cream, shredded cheese, diced onion, and seasoned with salt and pepper before spreading into a greased baking dish. The topping, cornflakes crushed and tossed with melted butter, scattered over the surface, adding a sweet, salty crunch that contrasted with the creamy potato base. Baked at 350 F for 45 minutes, it emerged golden and crispy on top, soft and rich underneath. Seniors still remember the first bite, the way the crunchy topping gave way to smooth, cheesy potatoes that tasted indulgent yet homey. Crispy potato bake anchored every church buffet table, the kind of dish people returned to again and again, and the recipe traded between friends like currency in the fellowship hall. Golden fried chicken was the centerpiece of every church fundraiser dinner. Crispy and juicy pieces seasoned with salt, pepper, and paprika, then dredged in flour and fried in hot oil until deep golden brown. Church kitchens filled with the sound of sizzling chicken and the smell of seasoned crust crisping to perfection, each piece turned carefully to ensure even cooking. Served hot on large platters lined with paper towels to catch the excess oil, the chicken stayed crispy outside and tender inside, the kind of fried chicken people traveled across town to taste. Seniors craved this dish not just for the flavor, savory, salty, satisfying, but for the memory of sitting at long tables with neighbors and friends, passing platters and filling plates until everyone had enough. Golden fried chicken symbolized celebration and abundance, proof that church suppers offered more than just a meal, they offered connection, joy, and the simple pleasure of good food made with care. Cheesy elbow macaroni was the comfort food classic that never failed at church potlucks. A baked casserole made with elbow pasta, sharp cheddar cheese, milk, butter, and a breadcrumb topping. The macaroni boiled until tender, then drained and mixed with butter, shredded cheese, and milk to create a creamy base that poured into a buttered baking dish. More cheese sprinkled over the top, followed by breadcrumbs for texture, then the whole dish baked at 350 F for 25 minutes until bubbling and golden. The result was rich, cheesy, and comforting, the kind of macaroni that satisfied kids and adults alike. Seniors still crave this dish because it tasted like Sunday afternoons after church, when the whole congregation gathered and everyone brought their best recipe to share. Cheesy elbow macaroni proved that simple ingredients, pasta, cheese, butter, could create something unforgettable when made with care and served with love in a room full of people who felt like family. These 10 church supper favorites, from coastal casserole to cheesy elbow macaroni, capture the heart of 1950s fellowship meals, where every dish carried the care of the cook and the warmth of community, reminding us that the best meals are always the ones we share together. Church supper hot dish was the hearty, crowd-pleasing casserole that anchored every fellowship hall buffet table in the 1950s. A one-pan wonder that combined ground beef, egg noodles, corn, cream of mushroom soup, and shredded cheddar cheese into a filling meal that fed dozens without breaking the budget. The dish began with browning a pound of ground beef in a large skillet, draining the fat, then stirring in cooked egg noodles, a can of drained corn, and a can of cream of mushroom soup, thinned with a splash of milk to create a creamy, savory base. The mixture spread into a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish, topped with a generous layer of shredded cheddar cheese, then baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes until the cheese melted into a golden, bubbly crust and the edges turned crispy. Church ladies loved this recipe because it required only pantry staples, could be assembled the night before, and tasted even better after sitting, making it perfect for Sunday dinners when time was short and appetites were large. Seniors still crave church supper hot dish because it tastes like community, like sitting at long tables covered in paper tablecloths, passing platters and filling plates until everyone had seconds. Like the warmth of a fellowship hall filled with laughter and the comforting knowledge that no one would leave hungry. This dish symbolized the heart of church suppers, simple food made with care, served with love, and shared with gratitude. Scalloped potatoes were the creamy, comforting side dish that appeared at every church potluck and holiday gathering, a layered casserole made with thinly sliced potatoes, butter, flour, milk, and salt that baked into tender, golden perfection. The preparation was simple but required patience, peeling and slicing potatoes into thin, even rounds, then layering them in a buttered baking dish with dots of butter, a sprinkle of flour, and a pinch of salt between each layer. Whole milk poured over the top, just enough to cover the potatoes but not drown them. Then the dish covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour before uncovering for the final 15 minutes to let the top turn golden and slightly crispy. The result was creamy, starchy, and rich. Each slice of potato soft enough to cut with a fork, yet structured enough to hold its shape on the plate. Church ladies brought this dish in covered casserole carriers, still steaming when they arrived, and placed it alongside the roast beef or fried chicken where it disappeared quickly. Seniors craved scalloped potatoes because they tasted like Sunday dinners after service, like sitting with neighbors at long tables in the church basement, like the simple pleasure of a warm, filling meal shared with people who felt like family, even if you only saw them once a week at potlucks and prayer meetings. Mushroom green bean bake was the iconic side dish that defined 1950s church suppers. A creamy casserole made with canned green beans, cream of mushroom soup, milk, and a crunchy fried onion topping that became synonymous with holiday meals and fellowship gatherings. The dish assembled quickly. 2 cans of drained green beans mixed with 1 can of cream of mushroom soup thinned with a half cup of milk, then seasoned with black pepper and spread into a buttered baking dish. Half a can of French fried onions stirred into the mixture, saving the rest for topping, then the whole dish baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until bubbling. The reserved onions scattered over the top during the last 5 minutes, crisping under the heat and adding a salty, crunchy contrast to the creamy beans beneath. Seniors still remember the taste, earthy mushroom flavor coating soft green beans, the surprise crunch of fried onions in every bite, and the way this casserole anchored every potluck table, sitting between the turkey and the mashed potatoes, always the first side dish to empty. Mushroom green bean bake symbolized convenience and tradition, a recipe that required minimal effort yet delivered maximum comfort, proving that church ladies knew how to stretch $1 and a can of soup into something everyone looked forward to eating. Year after year, potluck after potluck, without ever growing tired of it. Sweet corn custard was the beloved Southern-style side dish that brought a touch of sweetness to church supper tables. A baked casserole made with canned corn, eggs, milk, sugar, and butter that cooked into a soft pudding-like texture somewhere between a side dish and a dessert. The preparation felt almost meditative, draining 2 cans of whole kernel corn, then whisking together eggs, milk, melted butter, a quarter cup of sugar, and a pinch of salt until smooth and creamy. The corn stirred into the custard base, then poured into a buttered baking dish and baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes until the center set and the top turned golden, with edges that puffed slightly and browned. The result was sweet, creamy, and comforting, each spoonful soft and rich, with corn's natural flavor enhanced by butter and sugar, a dish that tasted like summer even in the dead of winter. Church ladies brought this casserole in deep dishes, still warm from the oven, and placed it near the rolls and salads where it disappeared quickly despite, or maybe because of, its unusual sweetness. Seniors craved sweet corn custard because it reminded them of simpler times, of potlucks where every dish told a story, of the way certain flavors could transport you back to folding chairs and paper plates, and the sound of grace being said over a table full of food made with care. Citrus chicken and rice was the bright, flavorful casserole that stood out on church supper tables, a one-dish meal made with chicken pieces, long-grain rice, orange juice, lemon juice, and onion that baked into a tangy, savory dinner. The dish began by spreading uncooked rice across the bottom of a greased baking dish, then arranging raw chicken pieces, thighs, drumsticks, or breasts over the rice seasoned generously with salt, pepper, and paprika. A mixture of orange juice, lemon juice, water, and diced onion poured over everything, the citrus adding brightness and acidity that cut through the richness of the chicken and infused the rice with flavor as it cooked. Covered tightly with foil, the dish baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 90 minutes, the liquid absorbing into the rice while the chicken turned tender and golden, the skin crisping during the final uncovered 15 minutes. The result was a complete meal in one pan, protein, starch, and flavor that required almost no prep, yet tasted like hours of work. Seniors still craved citrus chicken and rice because it reminded them of potlucks where someone always brought something unexpected, where the buffet table held surprises alongside the classics, and where every dish, no matter how simple, carried the care and creativity of the cook who made it for a community that felt like home. These 15 church supper classics, from church supper hot dish to citrus chicken and rice, show how 1950s congregations turned pantry staples into meals that fed both body and spirit, proving that the best dishes were always the ones made with care and shared at tables where everyone belonged. Turkey biscuit cobbler was the budget-friendly casserole that transformed leftover turkey into a comforting meal for church gatherings, a savory dish made with cooked turkey, mixed vegetables, cream of chicken soup, and a biscuit topping that baked into golden perfection. The filling came together quickly, diced cooked turkey mixed with a can of mixed vegetables, burrants, peas, corn, green beans, cream of chicken soup thinned with a half cup of milk, and seasoned with salt, pepper, and a pinch of poultry seasoning. The mixture spread into a buttered baking dish, then topped with biscuit dough, either homemade drop biscuits or canned biscuits torn into pieces that covered the filling like a cobbler. Baked at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, the biscuits rose and browned while the filling bubbled underneath, creating a complete meal that scooped easily onto plates. Church ladies loved this recipe because it stretched a small amount of meat into a dish that fed many, used up vegetables that might otherwise go to waste, and delivered the kind of comfort food people craved on cold Sunday evenings after service. Seniors still remember turkey biscuit cobbler as the dish that appeared the week after Thanksgiving, when every cook in the congregation had leftover turkey and everyone brought their version to share. Each slightly different, but all equally satisfying and warmly received. Beef spinach bake was the hearty casserole that combined protein and vegetables into one filling dish, perfect for church suppers where feeding a crowd on a budget was essential. Made with ground beef, frozen spinach, cottage cheese, egg noodles, and shredded mozzarella, this casserole layered flavors and textures into a satisfying meal that tasted far more complex than its simple ingredients suggested. The preparation began with browning a pound of ground beef, draining the fat, then stirring in thawed and squeezed dry spinach, cottage cheese, cooked egg noodles, and seasonings of garlic powder, salt, and pepper. The mixture spread into a greased baking dish, topped with shredded mozzarella, then baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 35 minutes until the cheese melted into a golden, bubbly crust. The result was rich and savory, the beef providing hearty flavor, the spinach adding earthiness and color, the cottage cheese creating creaminess, and the noodles binding everything into a cohesive, spoonable casserole. Seniors craved beef spinach bake because it reminded them of potlucks where every dish had to pull its weight, where cooks took pride in bringing something substantial and nourishing, and where the buffet table represented the community's collective effort to care for one another through the simple, powerful act of sharing a meal made with thoughtfulness, economy, and love. Hamburger noodle casserole was the classic ground beef dish that appeared at nearly every church supper. A simple yet satisfying casserole made with ground beef, egg noodles, tomato sauce, sour cream, and cheddar cheese. The dish began by browning ground beef with diced onion, draining the fat, then stirring in tomato sauce, a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity, and seasonings of salt, pepper, and Italian herbs. Cooked egg noodles folded into the meat sauce along with sour cream, creating a creamy, tangy base that spread into a buttered baking dish. Shredded cheddar cheese covered the top, then the casserole baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the cheese melted and the edges bubbled. The result was comfort food at its finest: savory beef, tangy sour cream, soft noodles, and melted cheese combining into a dish that satisfied every palate and stretched a pound of meat into 8 generous servings. Church ladies relied on Hamburger noodle casserole because it never failed, always pleased, and could be assembled ahead of time and baked just before serving. Seniors still crave this casserole because it tastes like Sunday afternoons after service, like the fellowship hall filled with familiar faces, like the comfort of knowing that no matter what challenges the week brought, there would always be a warm meal and a welcoming table waiting at church. Tangy cabbage salad was the crisp, refreshing side dish that balanced the rich casseroles and fried foods at church suppers. A simple slaw made with shredded cabbage, carrots, vinegar, sugar, and celery seed. The preparation required only a sharp knife and a bowl, half a head of green cabbage shredded thin, 1 large carrot grated, then tossed together in a large mixing bowl. The dressing whisked together separately: white vinegar, sugar, vegetable oil, salt, pepper, and a teaspoon of celery seed for a distinctive flavor. Then poured over the cabbage and carrots, tossing until every strand coated in the sweet sour dressing. Refrigerated for at least an hour before serving, the salad softened slightly as the vegetables absorbed the dressing, mellowing the raw cabbage bite and allowing the flavors to meld. Served cold in large bowls with a slotted spoon, the salad provided a crunchy, tangy contrast to the heavy main dishes, a palate cleanser between bites of casserole and fried chicken. Seniors still remember tangy cabbage salad as the dish that appeared at every potluck without fail, the recipe so simple it required no written instructions, passed down through demonstration and taste. A testament to the fact that church suppers didn't need complicated recipes to create memorable meals, just fresh ingredients, tried and true combinations, and the willingness to share. Egg and mayo sandwiches were the simple, satisfying lunch option that appeared at church picnics and afternoon teas, a classic filling made with hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, mustard, salt, and pepper spread between slices of soft white bread. The preparation was straightforward: a dozen eggs boiled until hard, cooled, peeled, then chopped fine and mixed with enough mayonnaise to bind, a spoonful of yellow mustard for tang, and seasonings of salt and pepper to taste. The egg salad chilled in the refrigerator until serving time, then spread generously on bread, crusts removed for special occasions, and cut into triangles or rectangles for easy serving. Arranged on platters and covered with damp towels to prevent drying, the sandwiches disappeared quickly as church members filled their plates. Seniors craved egg and mayo sandwiches because they represented simplicity and economy, a protein-rich meal made from ingredients every household kept on hand, requiring no cooking beyond boiling water and no skills beyond mixing. These sandwiches reminded them of summer Sundays after service, of picnic tables under shade trees, of paper plates and lemonade, and the easy fellowship that happened when people gathered to share a simple meal outdoors, proving once again that the best food didn't need to be fancy. It just needed to be made with care and served with welcome. These 20 church supper favorites, from turkey biscuit cobbler to egg and mayo sandwiches, capture the spirit of 1950s fellowship meals, where simple ingredients became extraordinary dishes through the care of the cook and the warmth of community gathered around tables that welcomed. Molded gelatin salad was the colorful, jiggly centerpiece of every 1950s church potluck table, a sweet, savory creation that combined flavored gelatin, canned fruit, and sometimes cottage cheese or whipped cream into elaborate shapes that wobbled precariously on serving. Platters and drew admiration from everyone who saw them. Church ladies took immense pride in their gelatin molds, investing in special pans shaped like rings, bundt cakes, fish, or even stars to showcase their creations and demonstrate their mastery of this uniquely mid-century culinary art form. The basic preparation began with dissolving a package of flavored gelatin. Lime, cherry, orange, or strawberry were the most popular choices among church cooks. In boiling water, stirring constantly and patiently until every single crystal completely dissolved into a smooth, translucent liquid with no graininess remaining, then adding cold water or fruit juice to cool the mixture down and begin the magical setting process. Drained canned fruit cocktail, pineapple chunks, mandarin oranges, or maraschino cherries folded carefully into the semi-set gelatin at just the right consistency, not too liquid or the fruit would sink, not too firm or it wouldn't incorporate, along with mini marshmallows, chopped pecans, or shredded coconut for added texture and visual interest, then the whole colorful mixture carefully poured into a greased mold to prevent sticking and refrigerated overnight until completely firm and ready for the big reveal. The next morning, the mold dipped briefly in a basin of warm water to loosen the edges without melting the gelatin, then inverted confidently onto a lettuce-lined platter where it released with a satisfying slurp and gentle wobble, revealing its shimmering, translucent shape in all its glory for everyone to admire. Some ambitious versions featured multiple layers of different colors: red gelatin on the bottom, a creamy white cream cheese layer in the middle, bright green gelatin on top, creating a patriotic or festive striped effect that required perfect timing and patience to ensure each layer set properly before adding the next layer on top. Others suspended whole fruit pieces strategically in clear or lightly colored gelatin, creating a beautiful stained glass effect when sliced that made each individual serving look like an edible work of art worthy of a museum. The taste was predominantly sweet and fruity with occasional tangy notes, the texture distinctively bouncy, jiggly, and refreshing, serving as a palate cleanser between all the heavy casseroles, rich gravies, and fried foods that dominated the rest of the buffet table. Seniors still crave molded gelatin salad today, not necessarily for its flavor, which was admittedly more about novelty and visual appeal than gourmet sophistication, but for the warm memories it brings back. Golden cornmeal bread was the essential side that accompanied every bowl of chili, plate of beans, or serving of stew at church suppers. A slightly sweet, crumbly bread made with cornmeal, flour, eggs, milk, and baking powder that baked into golden squares perfect for soaking up gravy and sauce. The recipe came together quickly, making it ideal for busy church ladies preparing food for crowds on Sunday mornings. Dry ingredients: yellow cornmeal, all-purpose flour, granulated sugar, baking powder, and salt, whisked together in a large mixing bowl, creating a pale yellow mixture with the distinctive sandy, gritty texture of ground corn. In a separate bowl, eggs beaten thoroughly with whole milk and melted butter until smooth and well combined, then poured into the dry ingredients and stirred just until combined, leaving small lumps that would disappear during baking, and ensuring the bread stayed tender rather than tough. The batter, thicker than typical cake batter but thinner than biscuit dough, spread into a greased 9 by 13-inch pan, smoothed level with a rubber spatula, then baked at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes until the top turned golden brown and a toothpick inserted in the center came out clean with no wet batter clinging. The finished cornbread emerged from the oven with a slightly crispy crust on top and tender, moist interior underneath, the edges pulling away from the pan and browning darker and crispier than the softer center portions. Cut into generous squares while still warm, each piece released fragrant steam and the sweet corn-forward aroma that filled the fellowship hall and drew people toward the buffet table even before the blessing was said. Church ladies served cornbread warm, placed in napkin-lined baskets to retain heat, or served directly from the pan for casual gatherings, accompanied by butter pats, honey for drizzling, or molasses for those who preferred darker sweetness. The taste was mildly sweet and earthy with pronounced corn flavor, the texture somewhere between cake and bread, crumbly enough to fall apart if handled roughly, but sturdy enough to hold a generous smear of butter or sop up the last precious drops of soup or chili from your bowl. Seniors still crave golden cornmeal bread because it tastes like Sunday suppers after evening service, like sitting at long tables in the church basement with a bowl of chili and a square of warm cornbread, like the simple satisfaction of bread made from scratch by someone who cared enough to wake up early and bake for the congregation with love and dedication. Chicken shredded potato bake was the hearty, all-in-one casserole that made Sunday dinners manageable for church ladies feeding large crowds, combining cooked chicken, frozen shredded hash browns, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and cheddar cheese into a filling dish that served dozens from a single 9 by 13-inch pan. The preparation required minimal effort and cooking skill, making it ideal for potlucks where time was limited and expectations were high from hungry congregants. A large bag of frozen hash browns, thawed slightly at room temperature for easier mixing, then combined in a large bowl with 2 cans of cream of chicken soup, a full container of sour cream, 2 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, 1 cup of diced onion, and generous seasonings of salt, black pepper, and garlic powder until every single potato shred coated completely in the creamy, cheesy mixture. Cooked chicken, either leftover roasted chicken from Sunday dinner, convenient rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, or plain poached chicken breasts, shredded by hand into bite-sized pieces and folded evenly into the potato mixture, distributing protein throughout every portion of the casserole. The combined mixture spread into a well-greased baking dish, pressed down firmly with the back of a spoon to eliminate air pockets that might cause uneven cooking, then topped with an additional generous handful of shredded cheese and a thick scattering of crushed cornflakes mixed with melted butter for satisfying crunch and golden color. Baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 50 minutes to an hour, the casserole bubbled vigorously around the edges, the cheese on top melted into a golden, slightly browned crust, and the hash browns softened into tender, flavorful bites that still held their individual shape and texture. The result was comfort food at its absolute finest, creamy, cheesy, filling, and deeply satisfying, with the chicken providing essential protein, the potatoes delivering stick-to-your-ribs heartiness, and the cornflake topping adding much-needed textural contrast to the soft interior. Seniors craved chicken shredded potato bake, saving techniques. Every single bite tasted like community, like fellowship halls filled with familiar faces and warm welcomes. Savory beef pie was the impressive centerpiece. The filling began with browning 2 pounds of ground beef in a large, heavy skillet, breaking it into small, uniform pieces as it cooked and rendered its fat. Then draining excess grease and stirring in diced potatoes, chopped onions, sliced carrots, and generous seasonings of salt, black pepper, dried thyme, and a good splash of Worcestershire sauce for depth into the bottom crust, mounded slightly higher in the center for an attractive dome shape, then covered completely with the top crust, topped to allow steam to escape during baking. Brushed liberally with beaten egg for beautiful golden shine, the assembled pie baked at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 50 minutes until the crust turned rich golden brown, and the filling bubbled energetically through the vents, filling the entire with the irresistible aroma of buttery pastry and savory, well-seasoned. Slicing into savory beef pie with a sharp knife revealed beautiful layers of tender vegetables, seasoned meat, and thick, flavorful gravy, completely encased in multiple flaky layers of golden crust. A truly complete meal in a single, impressive serving that required only a fork and perhaps a side salad. Seniors still remember with pride the care church ladies took with their beef pies, transporting them carefully in special insulated carriers, and the deep satisfaction of cutting perfect slices that held their shape beautifully on. Firehouse chili was the hearty, deeply warming dish that anchored church suppers on cold winter evenings, a thick, meaty chili made with ground beef, kidney beans, crushed tomatoes, onions, and bold chili powder that simmered for hours until all the flavors melded together into rich, deeply satisfying comfort. Church kitchens would start the massive pot of chili mid-morning, allowing it to cook slowly and gently while dedicated volunteers set up long tables, arranged folding chairs, and prepared all the other dishes, with the irresistible aroma of spices and simmering meat filling the entire hall long before the first hungry guest walked through. The recipe always began with browning several pounds of ground beef in the largest stockpot the church kitchen owned, breaking the meat into small, even pieces as it cooked, then draining most of the rendered fat but leaving just enough behind to saute generous amounts of diced onions and minced garlic until they turned soft, translucent, and wonderfully fragrant. Multiple cans of crushed tomatoes, plain tomato sauce, and rich beef broth added to create the flavorful liquid base, followed by several drained cans of dark red kidney beans, sometimes pinto beans too for variety, and bold seasonings of chili powder, ground cumin, smoked paprika, salt, black pepper, and just a pinch of cayenne pepper for those congregation members who genuinely enjoyed. The enormous pot brought to a rolling boil over high heat, then immediately reduced to a low, gentle simmer and left to cook undisturbed for at least 2 full hours, stirred occasionally with a long wooden spoon to prevent sticking or burning on the bottom, while the liquid slowly reduced, thickened into a rich, deeply flavorful, perfectly spoonable consistency. Some experienced church ladies added a spoonful of granulated sugar to balance the natural acidity of all those tomatoes, while others stirred in a square of unsweetened baking chocolate for unexpected depth and complexity. And a few closely guarded secret recipes included a generous splash of strong black coffee to enhance and deepen the beef flavor without making the finished chili taste even remotely like. Served steaming hot in sturdy bowls with a large serving ladle, the finished chili always topped with shredded sharp cheddar cheese, finely diced raw onions for crunch, and plenty of saltine crackers on the side for crumbling directly into each bowl for added texture and substance. The bold taste warmed bodies and souls, each generous spoonful delivering tender beef, creamy beans, and complex spices. These 25 church supper classics, from molded gelatin salad to Firehouse chili, show how 1950s congregations turned simple ingredients into extraordinary meals, proving that the best dishes were always the ones made with care, served with generosity, and shared at tables everyone belonged. Tomato bisque and toasted cheese was the comforting lunch pairing that appeared regularly at church ladies' auxiliary meetings, Bible study gatherings, and casual midweek fellowship meals. A simple yet deeply satisfying combination of creamy tomato soup and crisp grilled cheese sandwiches cut into perfect triangles for easy, elegant. The soup preparation started with opening cans of condensed tomato soup. Campbell's was always the trusted standard brand, then enhancing it significantly with a full can of rich whole milk instead of plain water to create a much richer, creamier, more luxurious, then heating everything. Gently on the stovetop with a generous pat of real butter, a pinch of granulated sugar to balance the natural acidity of the tomatoes, and several dashes of freshly ground black pepper for subtle warming. While the fragrant soup simmered and developed its flavors, the sandwiches assembled quickly on a hot griddle or in well-seasoned cast-iron skillets, slices of soft white bread generously buttered on the outside surfaces, filled with several slices of American cheese or sharp cheddar cheese, depending on personal preference, then carefully griddled over steady medium heat until the bread turned beautiful golden brown and perfectly crispy, and the cheese inside melted into gooey, stretchy. Each finished sandwich cut diagonally into two neat triangles using a sharp knife, then arranged attractively on serving platters alongside individual bowls of steaming hot soup, creating the classic pairing that children and adults of all ages enjoyed equally. Church ladies genuinely loved this particular combination because it required only minimal ingredients that everyone kept stocked in their pantries, could be prepared remarkably quickly, even for unexpected crowds or last-minute gatherings, and always, without exception, satisfied every single person. The creamy soup served piping hot in ceramic mugs or shallow bowls, sometimes garnished with a light sprinkle of dried basil or a decorative swirl of heavy cream for special occasions and holiday meetings, while the golden sandwiches stacked invitingly on plates, still warm enough that the cheese stretched dramatically and appetizingly when you pulled the triangles apart. Chicken vegetable pie was the practical, all-in-one comfort dish that cleverly transformed leftover chicken into an impressive, company-worthy meal for church potlucks and special gatherings, a deeply savory pie generously filled with chunks of tender cooked chicken, colorful mixed vegetables, and thick, creamy gravy all enclosed securely in flaky, buttery pastry that baked until beautifully golden and bubbling hot through the Church ladies particularly valued this versatile recipe because it effectively stretched a relatively small amount of leftover meat into a substantial dish that fed many hungry people generously, efficiently used up odds and ends of vegetables that might otherwise be wasted or forgotten in the back of the refrigerator, and presented beautifully and impressively on any buffet table where it always drew admiring. The rich filling came together by first sautéing finely diced onion and celery in melted butter until completely soft, translucent, and wonderfully then carefully stirring in all-purpose flour to create a smooth, pale roux that would thicken the gravy, and gradually adding chicken broth and whole milk while whisking constantly and vigorously to prevent any lumps from forming, creating a thick, velvety, pourable gravy with perfect consistency that coated the back of an cooked chicken, either leftover roasted chicken from Sunday dinner, convenience store-bought rotisserie chicken that saved time, or plain poached chicken breasts, carefully shredded or diced into uniform bite-sized pieces and folded evenly into the creamy gravy, along with a full bag of frozen mixed vegetables containing peas, carrots, corn, and green beans for color and nutrition, plus traditional seasonings of salt, black pepper, dried thyme, and a single bay leaf for aromatic depth and complexity, then simmered together gently on the stovetop until the frozen vegetables softened and all the wonderful flavors melded together harmoniously into a cohesive. The flavorful mixture cooled to room temperature to prevent the pastry from becoming soggy while pastry prepared, either homemade pie dough rolled carefully to an even thickness or convenient store-bought pie crusts fitted without tearing into a deep dish pie pan, with the completely cool spooned generously into the bottom crust, then completely covered with a second crust laid carefully over the top, the edges pressed firmly together all around and crimped decoratively with fingers and several strategic vents cut in the top crust to allow built-up steam to escape, baking, and prevent the pie from. Cottage beef and potato pie was the British-inspired comfort dish that became a beloved church supper staple across a hearty, filling casserole generously layered with well-seasoned ground beef, tender vegetables, and creamy mashed potatoes that baked Distinctive peaked top turned beautifully golden and irresistibly crispy around the edges and peak. Also called shepherd's pie when traditionally made with lamb, or cottage pie when made with beef, this substantial dish represented the ultimate practical one-pan meal, essential protein, nutritious vegetables, and satisfying starch all cleverly combined into a filling, deeply satisfying dinner that fed a crowd very affordably and left everyone feeling content, warm, well-fed. The flavorful preparation always began with browning 2 pounds of ground beef in a large, heavy skillet over medium-high heat, breaking the meat into small, uniform pieces as it cooked and released its natural juices and fat, then draining away excess rendered fat carefully and immediately, sauteing generous amounts of diced onions, sliced carrots, and chopped celery directly in the same pan until everything turned soft, sweet, caramelized, and wonderfully aromatic. Rich tomato paste stirred in for concentrated depth, umami richness, and beautiful color, followed by beef broth for moisture, a generous splash of Worcestershire sauce for complex umami richness and tang, and traditional seasonings of salt, freshly ground black pepper, and dried thyme for classic flavor, with the entire mixture left to simmer steadily on the stovetop until the liquid reduced significantly into a thick, rich, deeply flavorful gravy that coated every single piece of meat and vegetable perfectly and clung to the spoon. The savory filling spread evenly into a greased baking dish and smoothed completely level with the back of a spoon, then topped generously with a thick layer of creamy mashed potatoes prepared with plenty of butter, milk, salt, and pepper until perfectly smooth, fluffy, and cloud-like in texture. The mashed potatoes spread carefully and evenly over the beef mixture using a rubber spatula or offset spatula, covering it completely from edge to edge without any gaps, then deliberately roughed up using the tines of a fork to create distinctive peaks and valleys that would crisp beautifully, brown attractively, and add textural interest during the baking process. Some particularly skilled and artistic church ladies even piped the potatoes decoratively through a large pastry bag fitted with a star tip for an especially elegant restaurant-quality presentation that genuinely impressed fellow potluck contributors and earned compliments and requests. The comforting taste was deeply familiar and satisfying, richly savory beef and tender vegetables contrasting beautifully with creamy, buttery potatoes. Creamy potato salad was the absolutely essential side dish that appeared without fail at every church picnic, potluck supper, and summer gathering throughout the 1950s, a cool, tangy salad made with tender boiled potatoes, hard-boiled eggs, crisp celery, onion, and a rich mayonnaise-based dressing that always tasted significantly better the longer it sat chilling in the refrigerator and allowing all the wonderful flavors to meld together. The careful preparation always began the night before the scheduled event, with many pounds of russet or Yukon Gold potatoes thoroughly scrubbed clean under cold running water, boiled gently in well-salted water until perfectly fork tender but definitely not mushy, falling apart, or overcooked. Then drained completely in a colander and left to cool to room temperature on the counter, with some particularly meticulous cooks even refrigerating them overnight for significantly easier handling, cleaner cutting, and less chance of the potatoes breaking apart during mixing. Once completely cool to the touch, the cooked potatoes peeled carefully by hand and cubed into uniform bite-sized pieces that maintained their shape without crumbling or breaking apart into mush. Hard-boiled eggs chopped into chunky pieces for protein, richness, and beautiful yellow-white color contrast. Fresh celery diced fine for satisfying crunch and refreshing texture, and yellow onion minced very small to distribute subtle savory flavor throughout every bite without overwhelming sensitive palates or causing large, harsh pieces that some people would pick out. The creamy dressing whisked together in a large mixing bowl, plenty of mayonnaise as the base, prepared yellow mustard for tang, white vinegar for brightness, granulated sugar for balance, salt and freshly ground black pepper, creating a tangy, creamy, perfectly balanced coating that would envelop. All components combined together gently using a large spoon or rubber spatula to avoid breaking the tender potatoes, then covered tightly with plastic wrap and refrigerated for at least 4 full hours or preferably overnight to allow all the wonderful flavors to meld together completely. Served ice cold in large serving bowls with serving spoons, the finished potato salad always garnished attractively with a dusting of paprika and decorative sliced hard-boiled eggs arranged on top for visual appeal and presentation. The taste was creamy and tangy with subtle underlying sweetness. Sweet dinner rolls were the soft, pillowy, cloud-like bread that appeared in napkin-lined baskets on every church supper table throughout the 1950s and beyond. Homemade yeast rolls made with flour, milk, butter, sugar, and eggs that baked into beautiful golden, tender perfection that everyone at the table reached for eagerly and repeatedly throughout the entire meal. Church ladies often baked dozens and dozens of rolls the morning of a potluck, special dinner, or holiday gathering, with their home kitchens filled with the distinctive, irresistible, yeasty rising aroma that promised fresh, homemade bread to accompany every casserole, main dish, side dish, and salad on the buffet table and made neighbors walking past stop and inhale deeply. The traditional dough always began with warming whole milk to lukewarm temperature, tested carefully on the inside of the wrist to ensure it wasn't too hot and wouldn't kill the yeast, then dissolving active dry yeast and a spoonful of granulated sugar to proof for about 5 minutes until foamy, bubbly, and fragrant, clearly signaling the yeast was alive, active, healthy, and ready to work its leavening magic. Melted butter, beaten eggs, additional sugar for sweetness, salt for flavor balance, and several cups of all-purpose flour mixed gradually into the proofed yeast mixture in stages, then kneaded patiently by hand on a well-floured surface or with a stand mixer fitted with a dough hook attachment, until the dough became perfectly smooth, elastic, supple, no longer sticky or tacky to the touch, but still wonderfully soft, pliable, and alive. The kneaded dough placed in a greased bowl large enough to allow for expansion, covered completely with a clean, damp kitchen towel to prevent drying, and left to rise undisturbed in a warm, draft-free spot for 1 full hour until doubled significantly in size, looking puffy, light, and full of air, then punched down firmly with a fist to release trapped air bubbles and redistribute the yeast, and shaped carefully into uniform golf ball-sized portions for even baking. Each individual portion rolled smooth and perfectly round between clean palms and placed in a greased baking pan, positioned touching each other but not crowded together too tightly, then covered again with the damp towel and allowed to rise a second time for about 30 minutes until noticeably puffy, doubled again in volume and touching their neighbors. Brushed liberally all over with melted butter before baking at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 to 18 minutes, the rolls emerged beautifully golden brown on top, snowy white and tender inside with a soft crumb, with their tops brushed again generously with more. These 30 church supper classics weren't just recipes, they were acts of love, community, and faith baked into every casserole, kneaded into every roll, and stirred into every pot of chili that filled fellowship halls across America. The church ladies who created these meals understood something profound, that feeding people was ministry, that a warm plate could heal a heavy heart, and that the table was where strangers became neighbors and neighbors became family. Every molded gelatin salad that wobbled on its platter, These weren't fancy meals designed to impress food critics or win cooking competitions. They were honest food made with humble ingredients, prepared by women who understood that love could be measured in cups of flour, tablespoons of butter, and the time it took for bread dough to rise twice before. Baking. Church suppers taught us that community happens around tables, that hospitality doesn't require perfection, and that the best meals are always the ones we share. The recipes themselves were simply vehicles for something deeper: connection, care, and the radical act of saying you belong here to everyone who walked through the door, whether they brought a dish or came empty-handed, whether they were lifelong members or first-time visitors. Which of these 30 church supper dishes does your family still make today? Did your grandmother bring one of these to potlucks? Share your favorite church supper memory in the comments below. We'd love to hear which recipes bring back the warmest memories and why certain dishes still taste like home, community, and Sunday afternoons spent with people who felt like family.